On February 10th, the federal government made a major announcement on the funding for public transportation. It's going to be $14.9 billion over 8 years, and starting in 2026, that'll be a permanent $3 billion a year. Not all of it is going to electrify transit, but it sounds like a good part of it will be. So we're going to talk to Josipa Petrunic, who is the CEO of CUTRIC, which is the Canadian Urban Transit Research and Investment Consortium. So welcome to the interview, Josipa.
Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be back.
Well, look, let's just start. What's your reaction to the announcement?
It's exactly what we asked for. So obviously we're elated. We put out an open letter with a number of our members, especially our transit agency members. We issued that some months ago, and it was very clear that if you want to get to zero emissions transit future, you need about $3 billion a year. And that just covers a lot of those differential costs for transitioning. So the public sector transit needed stable funding anyhow. We needed additional funding to get to zero emissions. They announced it in this $15 billion. And so it's given us everything we've asked for. Now we just need to work with the transit agencies to turn that cash into deployments.
Now, this is exciting news because it seems like the technology is right on the cusp of being ready for this. And we have Canadian manufacturers of that technology. We have a number of city transit agencies really across the country that you've been working with over the past 2, 3, 4 years to get ready for this. Are we poised to make a major leap forward in the electrification of transit?
Yeah, we are. This investment is going to drive a lot of sales. Those sales drive manufacturing, and that manufacturing, those contracts drive a lot of investment by international investors. And some of the key firms, of course, Novabus is part of Volvo Group. New Flyer Industries is a global corporation as well. Ballard is a global corporation. They all have stocks and shares. All of them will benefit from this kind of guidance from the government that this is the pathway forward. They'll be able to make investment decisions also within their own manufacturing, like how much longer they're going to keep rolling diesel buses off their lines when they know that their clientele probably as of 2025 won't be able to get any federal funding unless it's for zero emissions buses. So it has led to a large boon for the industry. It will likely lead to a large amount of investment into some of those core corporations. And for transit agencies, it's a massive sigh of relief. Coming out of a pandemic period and not yet quite out of it, not sure who would make up the fare box revenue losses. This gives clear guidance that the cash will be there to get to a climate future. Now it's just the technology and the planning to get there.
Now, so we've got a plan, and we've got funding, and we're going to electrify this. What about some of the innovations that you and I have talked about in previous interviews, like automated shuttles? Does this funding give a big boost to those kinds of innovations?
Well, it's funny, I was just on a panel a little bit earlier with the federal government and our colleagues in the United States talking about electrification and what President Biden's investments are going to look like compared to our announcement yesterday. And of course, everybody is now of the opinion in the transit world, we just got through the worst of learning the early stuff. Now we have the next 5 years ahead of getting over the massive engineering humps and the technology deployment challenges because it's so complicated, this stuff. And a question came up in that panel about, okay, now about AV buses. What about automated buses? And a number of the transit folks, their feeling is, look, we're just catching up with electrification. But there are AV pilots out there. New Flyer has deployed an autonomous bus pilot in the United States. The obvious dream is autonomous buses that platoon each other. So you get 4 or 5 of them with only one driver on a dedicated laneway. You basically get an LRT system without the track, without the infrastructure. So I don't think it's that far off because the technology is there, the electric busing is there. And what we're talking about in terms of this AV tech is very much platooning, not any kind of traffic condition. So I do think that this money will necessarily advance that. Although it's not the first thing I'm going to say to transit agencies as of tomorrow that you have to go to AV tech. We're still getting over the hump of EV tech.
Now, Canadians, I don't think are as aware as maybe they should be of the amount of innovation that comes out of Canada in this space. And we do have already, well, you mentioned some of the companies, but we also have supply chain manufacturers of goods and services here in Canada. Will that be a big boost for the companies that supply the supply chain?
Yeah, I always say, as Canadians, we're so super smart. We're so smart, and we come up with so many ideas. And it's unfortunate so many of our companies have to offshore to make it because the clientele isn't here. But this is one industry where we may be able to localize and grow while exporting and growing as well. So staying local. As an example, the jobs numbers are part of what will answer your question. Typically in Canada, we refer to the auto sector as one of those big job creators. You'll hear about it anytime you talk about NAFTA or the new NAFTA. And it's always been a few hundreds of thousands of jobs, 3, 4, 500,000 jobs. Today, we did the tabulation for Infrastructure Canada a couple months ago as they were coming up with these numbers. If you add up the new jobs in electrical utilities, the new jobs in the manufacturing of these buses and shuttles, including the hydrogen fuel cell technologies, the electrolyzers, the hydrogen supply chain with the Enbridges of the world, and then you add up the new jobs or retained jobs in transit by virtue of having to hire new people with new competencies to operate all this stuff, it's hundreds of thousands of jobs. So suddenly in this industry, we are competing with the classic automotive industry that's always been held up as the big job creator for Canadians. It is a great news story in that regard, and therefore Canada will have this investment opportunity to create local jobs while growing global companies.
Final question, Josipa. In all of the interviews that I've done about decarbonization strategies, energy transition strategies, government procurement is considered to be a real driver of change, because governments buy in large quantities and they can foster the development of industries. They can speed up growth in those industries by doing that. Is that part of the strategy here from the federal government, is to use, in this case, it may not be procuring those goods directly, but it's funding the procurement by public agencies, like transit authority?
Yeah, in fact, it is almost directly. Okay, maybe it's not a federally owned transit agency, but it's like procuring through your cousin, right? I mean, transit agencies are public entities. We don't really have private transit in Canada. We have a few private operators, but the vast majority of transit is public, owned by the city or owned by the province, and always subsidized federally, provincially, and municipally. So taxpayers somewhere are the owners of these systems. This is a massive public procurement. It is a smart use of tax dollars because it cycles through, right? It's coming out of federal coffers, which we all pay taxes into provincial municipal coffers to go back out into buses and systems that feed back into a ridership that pays money back into the city that then feeds back into the province and the federation. So it is a good recycling of dollars for technology innovation. And the comparisons have always been public procurement in military, in healthcare, in policing. Those three big, large areas have driven a lot of innovation in the background. And in areas where it hasn't been public, like the oil sector, if you come from Alberta, SAGD technology came out of a bunch of taxpayer investment 30 years ago, 20 years ago, that then got privatized and made loads of money for the private sector. So this is about us investing in the public sector, where the loads of investment will come back to us through operational savings and ridership revenues in the future as taxpayers.
Josipa, a pleasure as always. Thank you very much for this.
Thanks so much, Markham.